Hello everyone, this is Mayron, and it's nice to be able to say that finally we are ready to start making proper World of Warcraft add-ons that can actually be useful to us as players of the game. Sadly though, this topic is so large that we must first set up stuff and explain how the Blizzard widget system actually works. We will be able to create our first frame using XML templates, but a lot of explaining is needed along the way. You should now be prepared enough with the basics of the Lura language to start using the World of Warcraft API and the Widgets API without me having to pause and explain the basics to you. If I ever mention anything that you're unsure about, and it's not covered in one of my previous videos, then please ask questions in the comments section if you can't find the answer already there. So today I thought it'd be nice to actually have an add-on project in mind that we can work towards, so that I don't start creating random UI elements all over the place using widgets with no real purpose or general direction, because I find that by having an actual purpose, it makes the videos that to come a lot more interesting and more exciting. So I think that what we'll do is create graphical UI elements that are actually visible on the screen itself, and a perfect project in mind would be to create a buff frame add-on, I thought. So we can create some sort of add-on to track your buffs that are separate from the Blizzard default buff frame add-on that they have written themselves, and maybe for ours we'll be able to stylize it and have some custom user interface options to increase the size of buffs, maybe some other stuff, and we'll just see what we can come up with. This will also allow me to demonstrate a number of things at once. I can create buttons, checkboxes, sliders, and additional textures and font strings. Okay, so let me stress this really clearly. It is very important that you understand that textures and font strings, which are basically just text, these are technically classed as widgets, but I find it confusing to think of them this way because widgets consist of frames and regions. Now, frames and regions are pretty damn different. Regions are textures and font strings, this is what they are. Everything else is referred to as a frame. Regions are also sometimes called elements as well, so you might sometimes hear me referring to elements as regions and regions to elements, but essentially they are the same thing. There may be other less used ones that I might be forgetting, but if so, then they're hardly ever used and chances are you will never come across them. Now, the difference. Regions, they have to be added to a frame using the frame's object functions called createTexture and createFontString. Then, either with these two functions or afterwards, you assign them to a layer. Now, a frame can have up to 5 layer types. These layers are basically ways to categorize regions, similar to how Photoshop works, where layers can be placed in order to display visual graphics. You can think of a frame as a canvas, and the layers are the way of displaying textures and font strings onto them. So, okay, the 5 layers are called the background layer, the border, the artwork, overlay, and finally the highlights layer. I've just said these in the order of lowest to highest, so the background layer is the lowest layer, meaning that all higher layers will be displayed in front of it on the screen. So textures or font strings assigned to a higher layer will appear to overlap elements on a lower level layer. That's a bit of a tongue twister, Jesus Christ. Anyway, frames. They differ as they can be created from a global function called createFrame. This function is not attached to an object, unlike the createTexture and createFontString. This function is not attached to an object, so it can be created without the need for another object to exist. Because createTexture and createFontString, they're like methods. I've kind of briefly touched on that methods and functions are the same, but usually you say you say method when you're trying to describe a function inside of another table or an object. So an object will have a function attached to it. In this case, createFrame is global and it doesn't have an object that it's attached to. So frames can have children frames or child frames, and they have only one parent's frame. I'm pretty sure that you need at least one parent, but I'm not 100% on that, as I'm going to explain later on. But anyway, they also have layers for textures and font strings to be attached to them in order to make them visual and stand out on the screen. By default, they will not be visible without any of these regions attached to them. These regions, these elements, font strings and textures, they're all the same thing. These are what makes them visual. Child frames are just basically more frames that can be parented to the original frame. So that, for instance, if you hide the parent frame, then all the children frames will also be hidden. This is where it gets confusing. When I say the word frame, I'm referring to all widgets that exclude regions. However, there is an actual widget called frame, which makes it kind of confusing. This is the most common type of frame, and it does not inherit any additional functions. If you come from an object-oriented programming background, then you can think of the frame as the base class, or the super class. Other frame widgets inherit from this frame widget. So they can also be referred to as frames, but usually they are called something else like a button, or a check button, or even a slider. So technically, they are all frames because they all inherit the frame functions, but they also come with and offer additional functions. For example, the check button widget has a function called setChecked in order to tell the program that the check button has been checked or not. However, all widgets, including the check button as I just mentioned, these inherit the frame functions, including such functions as setPoint, which sets the position of the widget, setSize, well this is kind of obvious, and show and hide. This is just to name a few. Okay, so that's the most confusing part over with. You just need to know the difference between frames and regions, and that by saying the word frames does not mean and refer to the widget called frame. That's just the root widget to many other widgets, and that all inherit from this base frame widget. You will later see how to construct these, but for now, you need to export the Blizzard code and the Blizzard artwork, because we're going to be using that a lot. If you remember from episode 1, I showed you the WoW programming site where you can find the WoW API and the Widget API functions. From that site you can also see the Blizzard UI code and the artwork, but it's much more frustrating to use. It's much more easier to be able to see that in Notepad++, and I will show you how to export that from the data folder in the World of Warcraft folder to make it viewable for us. Note that by altering code in the files that we're going to be exporting, this has no effect on the actual game client, as this is just providing a copy for us to use and does not actually supply you with the actual source code, otherwise you could exploit the game and that would just be stupid. Because you could be able to just create some sort of add-on which gives you more gold. It doesn't work that way, okay? So let's get started. The first thing you want to do is head on over to the World of Warcraft folder and you'll see a wow.exe program. Also note that I'm using Windows 10, and even though other versions of Windows should be the same, I have no clue what Mac computers will show you. So if you're a Mac user, you may have to do some looking around on the internet and find out how to achieve the same sort of thing I'm doing. So what you want to do is right click on the wow.exe program and create a shortcut. Next, right click on this and select the properties option from the menu that shows up. Then in the shortcut tab, which should be the tab that initially shows up anyway, you will see a text edit box labelled target. There will be a string inside of this, also known as, text contained between two double quotes. Without touching this string, at the end of it, add a space followed by a hyphen and the word console, all in lowercase. Then press apply and exit the properties window. By adding this property, it will cause the wow.exe shortcut program to enable for us the Blizzard console in the actual game. So by double clicking this program, when you get to the login screen, don't bother logging in. You will need to press a button in order to show this console, so it's going to be on the screen for you. I have a UK layout keyboard, so the button for me is on the left hand side of the number 1, at the very top corner of the keyboard, which is underneath the F1. For the US, I'm pretty sure it's somewhere else, but if not, just use your eyes and look and try and find the key, okay? So by pressing this, we will enter two commands into the box that shows up, which is going to extract for us the Blizzard artwork and the Blizzard code. Type the following exactly as shown in the video. This may be case sensitive, I've never actually tried experimenting with this, but just to be on the safe side, make sure export is all in lowercase, interface starts off with a capital, same as the word files, none of this has a space in between, but then add a space and type code. This is the first command, and this will make the UI lag for about a second, as LoRa files and XML and TOC files are really small in file size, so this should be about a second. However, the art one, the second command, this is actually going to be about 10 to 20 seconds-ish, depending on the relative speed of your computer. So don't panic when the World of Warcraft client freezes for a moment, this is normal. It's just extracting these files. Once finished, Press the escape key twice to exit the WoW client and head back to the World of Warcraft folder. You'll see two new folders called Blizzard Interface Art and Blizzard Interface Code. The code folder is very useful as it contains not just the actual Blizzard code, which controls things such as, the character, the guild, the raid frames, etc., but also the HTML templates which we're going to be using soon enough. The art folder can be useful if you want to use predefined textures for the Blizzard UI. The art folder can be really useful as it allows you to use the predefined textures from the Blizzard UI and implement them yourself from the ground up. Usually though, you can use a template which saves you a great deal of time as it all comes packaged together with many textures already set up. As a side note, all the texture files in this folder are BLP file types. You cannot view these unless you use a converter. The only converter I'm aware of, and which I personally use myself, is available for download at WoW Interface. It doesn't require installing, it just comes with an exe file, and then you open the BLP files with that program. So you can type into Google, or I'll put a link down in the description. You can type into Google, please not Bing, but we won't go into that, that's a whole nother topic. Just type in something like WoW BLP converter, it'll be the first link from WoW Interface. And I am going to explain more about how to use separate textures directly and setting them up yourself rather than using templates in the future, because you will need to do that at some point when you actually create your own textures. But for now, we're not going to go into that because I feel as though I could talk about this for a very long time, and it's important for us to just skip ahead for now and create a new AddOn folder for our buff add-on. So navigate to the interface add-ons folder like you usually would, create a new folder and give it the name you want your add-on to, whatever you want it to be called really. I always call mine MUI underscore something, so in this case I'm just going to call mine MUI underscore buffs. Then create two files inside of this, one being the TOC file and the other being the Lua file. The TOC file must have the same name as the AddOn folder you just created. The Lua file can be called pretty much whatever you want, but I'm going to call it Core, because this is a popular convention that add-on authors tend to call the main Lua file, which controls all of the rest of the entire add-on. Then just make sure that the TOC file has the patch ID number, a title, and specify the core.lua file to be loaded. Then open up the core file and log into the character in World of Warcraft. Preferably one where, you won't be bothered and disturbed by your friends or programming and are in an isolated part of the world. It just makes files loading quicker and all those seconds really add up. So what I usually like to do is add to the very top of my code these three things I'm about to show you. Okay, so the first two sections of code just here on the screen, these add two new slash commands to my game. I can explain how to exactly create slash commands in the future, but from reading this code it kind of makes it pretty easy to understand and find out for yourself how to do it. The first slash command allows us to use /rl to reload the UI rather than having to type the whole entire longer version each time. This saves precious seconds again. It's just nicer. The second allows us to see the Blizzard frame stack in a similar sort of fashion, this time by typing /fs. Without having again to type out the longer version. We will require to use this frequently, so it's more convenient to have a shortcut prepared for it. The last part alters every single edit box attached to the chat box, so that you're able to run a script in the actual game, and actually be able to use the forwards and backward arrow keys on your keyboard to move up and down the text rather than it, by default, rotating your character, which removes a lot of unneeded frustration. This allows you to sort of edit scripts and run them really quickly in the game just for testing purposes. Okay, so under this, the real AddOn code, we can start writing. So I'm going to comment out this into its separate segment at the top of the file and just ignore it from now on. So let us create our very first widget. We will create the standard generic frame widget, which is going to be used as a parent container for all of our buttons, our check buttons, the sliders, and anything else that we decide to add. There are more widgets, of course, that I could talk about, but I will probably just demonstrate these three from now on, and if we ever come up with an option which requires another widget, then we'll introduce it. The frame will be the parent frame. And all of those other widgets that I've just mentioned, sliders, etc., these will be the child frames, which we will parent with this container frame we're going to be creating. So I will use the create frame function, the global function I told you about earlier, and supply it with 4 argument values. this createFrame function has a maximum of up to 4 arguments which you can supply it, but the last 3 are optional, as by default they are nil, with the possible exception of the 3rd argument, which I'm not 100% sure about, but I am pretty sure that by default it's not nil and instead it's the UI parent, because I think that frames require a parent's frame. And if you don't supply it one, I'm pretty sure it's the UI parent by default, but I could be wrong about this. So in the example I've just posted in Notepad++, I have chosen to make the frame's parent the UI parent, which can be thought of as the master frame, which is used to contain every single UI element on the screen. There is another major frame like this, which is called the world frame. However, it is strongly recommended not to parent anything to this world frame. I can explain the reasons why not in this video, but it's very technical and most likely will waste time and possibly confuse you even further if you're a beginner. So let's go over what this line is actually doing. It returns a new instance of the frame object, this widget. The first argument specifies the type of frame. In this case, like I've already mentioned, again, we just want to create a generic frame, so we called it frame. And I'm pretty sure it's case sensitive, this one. It might not be, but just start it off with a capital and then, frame, the rest of it's lowercase. The second argument is the global identifier, so that we can refer to our frame in World of Warcraft using the chat box, or even in another add-on somewhere. This can be confusing, however, because we have used the keyword local. This local variable on the left-hand side, this is just a reference to the global object. The local variable is kind of just a name that you can give it, a shorter, simplified name for inside of your body of code in your file. And you can't use it outside of the file. And all of the scoping things that we've talked about in the past, that all applies to local variables still, but there's just a global identifier, so you can get to your frame object you've created. You have 2 ways of referring to it, either in the file with the local variable or outside of the file with the global variable name. Just remember though that the global variable name has to be pretty unique so it doesn't clash and conflict with anything else that's already loaded in the environment. The third argument is the parent argument, as I have already explained, and the fourth argument is less commonly used. This is where things get a bit tricky. This is the inherited object property, which allows you to tell the Lua interpreter which XML templates you want to use. Unlike the third parent argument, this must be a string, because the Lua and the XML programming environments are separate. So, if you use the template name as a global variable instead of this string, Lua will not be able to find it. This string targets a template stored in the XML environment. This is the only way of linking the two together. So this XML environment, Blizzard have placed a load of templates in there, as you can see in the extracted file that we extracted earlier. So for this, I've chosen to use the basic frame template with inset template, which, like most of the other very important templates, this can all be found inside the Blizzard interface code folder and in the subfolder interface, and in the other subfolder frame XML, and in the file called UI panel templates.xml. You can also try swapping this with other templates found in this extremely large list of templates that Blizzard offers you, and you're allowed to use any of these you want. If you're feeling brave enough, you can look inside of this UI panel templates.xml file and you'll see all the other templates available for you to use. And you can try swapping names around in order to test out what others look like, but that's left up to you to do as a task, and we'll probably do that in an episode in future anyway. Also, one last thing. The fourth argument, this string, specifying the template to inherit from, can actually be a comma-separated list of templates, meaning that you can actually inherit from more than one template. This is not often needed, but it can certainly be very powerful a tool to use. For example, I could personally myself, rather than Blizzard using their templates, I could create an XML template that offers this capability of being able to resize a frame, while another could offer the capability of being able to move the frame around on screen. Then if I wanted to, I could create a frame and inherit from both of these templates, which would result in a frame which is both movable and resizable. So it can be very powerful, but sometimes the characteristics of one template can conflict with another, so you need to be very careful. Usually though, there's not really much problems involved with this. Anyway, let's get back on track. This template already comes with a number of textures which are now attached to the frame that we've just created, without us even needing to add any extra code in our Lua file. So, like I said, the textures make a frame graphical, but this is not enough to actually make the frame actually visible on the screen itself. If you reload the World of Warcraft user interface after saving the Lua file using that /rl shortcut that we just created, you will still not be able to see anything. This is because you still need to set the frame's position and the size. Sometimes XML templates, they actually already come with added default values for the default size and the position, and so they will automatically be visible on the screen by default. However, the one that we inherited from, this does not, unfortunately. So let's add these 2 lines of code ourselves in order to make the frame visible. The setSize function has 2 arguments for the width and the height. None of these 2 are optional, but there are functions called setWidth and setHeight if you only wanted to alter and set one rather than setting both. SetPoint has a maximum of 5 arguments. The last 2 have not been included, but basically these just control the X and Y coordinates for greater precision. The first argument is the anchor point for our frame, which we have set to center. The second is a relative frame, meaning that where we want to position our frame relative to another frame's position. So it's basically going to grab our frame and align the center point with the center point of the relative frame. The third argument is the relative point of this relative frame. We've set this to center so that it will do what I've just said, but you could have had this to top left. So the center of our frame is aligned to the top right or top left of another frame. As I mentioned, the UI parent is the entire visible game view, meaning everything. So setting the center point of our frame to the center point of the UI parent will simply just center our frame dead in the center of our game screen. The second and third arguments were optional, as I believe that the UI parent and center are actually the default values for these 2. So we did not actually need to include them in this situation, but I felt that I should actually explain what they do so it's easier for me just to show them and type them myself. Now, if we reload the UI, you should see our newly created frame with the textures that came with this XML template, which we inherited from, in the very center of our screen. Okay, so yeah, you can see it's there. It's all worked out pretty fine. We gave it a width and height, so you can adjust these, play around with stuff. I'd actually encourage you to reposition this all over the screen. So you saw that I typed center, but the other options are top left, top right, left, right, top left, bottom, and finally bottom right. I always put these all in capitals, but I know for a fact you can have these in lowercase without any errors showing up. There are no other values you're allowed to put besides these ones I've listed, but you can add 2 more arguments as numbers. They're not strings, they're numbers, to control the X and Y values. That pretty much covers everything I have time for. Next episode I'll go in greater depth with those child frames and then eventually adding scripts to them to make them interactive. So, thank you very much for watching, and I hope your brain doesn't hurt too much. Please leave questions for me to answer if you need any extra help, and again, this has been Mayron, and until next time, bye for now.